Yes, I think we should probably get started.
Okay. All right. Well, good evening, folks. Thanks for joining us for the third of our 3 Napa County Groundwater Sustainability public meetings. Before we get started, I want to just go over a little bit of protocol for how things are going to work tonight. Virtual meetings are, by the very nature of a virtual meeting, a little bit differently run than our in-person meetings. First off, all of our attendees tonight are muted and your cameras are turned off. This will allow the focus of the meeting to stay on our speakers instead of on peripheral noise from folks in the background. The meeting is going to be divided up into 3 different sections with approximately 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A after each section. To submit a question for our speakers, please type it in the Q&A box. On your computer, you can find the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. So if you hover over the bottom of your screen, a black bar should pop up and it should have a Q&A button that looks very much like what you see on the screen right now. Our speakers will, only questions should be entered into this box. Our speakers will answer as many questions as they have time for within each section, and they may skip some questions that will be answered in one of the later sections. If you have a comment that you would like noted, please enter it into the chat box. Only our speakers will be able to see your comment once it is submitted, but they will be recorded. And that chat box looks like this bottom box on the shared screen right now. If you are joining via telephone, meaning not on the Zoom app on your phone, but actually dialing in on a telephone, you will be unable to ask questions or leave comments during the meeting right now. At the end of the evening, I will put a link to a survey in the chat box. The survey will help us gain a better understanding of who you are and will also allow you to submit additional questions and comments that you might not have thought of during tonight's meeting. This link was also in your reminder email for this evening's meeting, and it's how those of you joining us by phone call can submit questions and comments for later review. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll through Zoom to get a sense of who we have in our meeting today. Please choose the interest group that best represents why you are here this evening. And if you choose other, please type in a description of your interest group into the chat box. And I think while all of you are doing the polls, we will go ahead and share the beginning of our presentation and get everybody set up and ready to go. Sorry, something happened, folks. I'm going to go ahead and relaunch the poll. I don't know exactly what happened. Our panelists, I'm not sure if you have the ability to stop our poll, but you just don't touch it for a little bit. Thanks. And if those of you who did already answer, if you could answer again in this poll, please do so. And Jameson, can you just confirm that you're seeing the right?
I am seeing the poll and I'm seeing the right presentation view.
Perfect. So let's maybe give people another 15 seconds or so to finish the poll and then head into the beginning. All right, so it looks like everybody has answered. Do you want me to share the results for everybody, Jameson? So everybody can see
Sure.
who, okay. So folks should be able to see the results of our poll right now. And Jameson, just let me know when you'd like me to stop sharing so that you can continue on with the meeting.
Yeah, it looks like we have about 7 agricultural users of groundwater 1 environmental user, a couple of domestic well owners, 4 surface water users, a couple of public water system folks, and 7 other. And the majority of people have not attended any previous meetings about the groundwater sustainability plan. So thank you, that was helpful.
And some other, just to let you know, some other interest groups are the GSPAC members. Was one other one that was typed in.
Mhm.
I will turn it over to you, Jameson.
Okay. So yeah, actually I'm Jameson Crosby, and I'm the Natural Resources Manager here at Napa County. And I'm going to turn it over to our director, David Morrison, Director of Planning, Building, Environmental Services, who will do an introduction to our presentation tonight.
Okay. If Ashley can let me start my video, or if I can just go to use the screens here, that's fine. All right. As Jameson said, my name is David Morrison. I'm the Director for Planning, Building, and Environmental Services with Napa County. I've been here about 8 years now. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Appreciate it. I know it's everybody's time is valuable, and there's a lot of competing demands in this topsy-turvy, busy world right now. And we're very glad that you decided to spend the next hour or two with us. This is the third public workshop regarding the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. Last week, we were all in St. Helena for an in-person meeting, and the week before that in South Napa. And so this is a video meeting for those people who either couldn't attend the in-person meetings or wanted to create a little bit more distance and view the meetings remotely. So for myself, this is something that runs very dear to heart to me. I grew up in Fresno. Fresno's pretty much a desert for the most part. By definition, the desert is about 10 to 12 inches of rain. Fresno gets about 12 inches of rain. And of course, if you've driven through there in the summertime, that's not a surprise to anybody. When I was about 13 or 14, there was a 3-year period where Fresno got a total of 23 inches in those entire 3 years. Napa's average rainfall is 27 inches. So Napa gets more rain in 1 year than Fresno got in those 3 years of drought. And during that time, I remember we were not able to water our yards. We were not able to wash our cars. And we were told to flush the toilets as little as possible, to conserve as much water as possible. Because it's in such a dry climate, Fresno has had a very aggressive groundwater recharge program going back to the 50s and 60s. There's about 30 different recharge basins spread throughout Fresno. Most of them are recreational areas where people play soccer and baseball. As a result, Fresno recharges about 20,000 acre-feet of rainwater every year back into the groundwater. That's probably about as much as the entire Napa Valley subbasin. They also supplement that with another 40 to 50,000 acre-feet, depending on the availability of water exported into Fresno and then recharged. So recharge is a very big component. That's something that certainly we could explore more here in Napa as a tool that we can use to manage our groundwater in the future. Can we move to the next slide, or am I able to advance that? Thank you.
Yes, and if you want to turn on your video, you should have that ability now.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. And Ashley, can I advance it, or does somebody else advance it? Sorry, quick housekeeping.
Ashley
That's
has
me.
to advance it.
Yep. You need
Okay.
one more? Advance one more, or are you good?
This is fine. So the Groundwater Sustainability Plan is just the most recent of a long series of events that have occurred. They've been made possible by the advisory committee, who has been working tirelessly for the past 2 years. Ludorf and Scalmanini Consulting Engineers, who is the consultants to the GSA. Concur, who's our facilitation team, some of whom are with us here tonight. And the Groundwater Sustainability Agency and county staff who staffed the agency. The current iteration of the GSP has been in development for about 2 years now, but this is only the beginning. Sustainable management is an ongoing process, as we'll discuss on and touch later on tonight in the presentation. This is a 50-year plan. This is not something where we just put it on a shelf and forget about it. This is something that will be going on well into our children and our grandchildren's lives. more importantly, in the next 20 years, we have to be able to demonstrate to the Department of Water Resources that we've achieved sustainability. And we're going to talk more about how that is defined and how that may be achieved. So we have a 50-year plan, so we have to look out for the very long term, but the things we need to do over the next 20 years to make sure that we're being successful. And of course, given the current situation we're in, there may be things that we need to do in the much near term, the immediate term, to address some of the things that are going on right now with the lack of rainfall. Right now, the Napa Valley subbasin is stable. We are seeing reductions in some areas of the subbasin. In some areas, the water has remained stable or even come up a little bit despite the lack of rainfall or the significantly reduced amount of rainfall. It's not sustainable though. It's stable through the series of decisions made by thousands of landowners and hundreds of or not hundreds, but dozens of public water community systems and municipalities and other agencies and entities, all of whom are acting independently to place various demands or to help recharge the groundwater basin. There's no coordination. Sustainability, a key component of that sustainability, is an overall coordination of all of these efforts to make sure that the groundwater basin as a whole is managed sustainably. And so that's why we are stable now, but we're not sustainable. And that's what the plan is going to be working towards over the next generation. Climate change and sea level are important parts of that, as are other factors. And again, we will be talking more about the various thresholds later in the presentation. And of course, we do encourage you and who are participating in this meeting and people out in the community in general to contact your local elected officials with the groundwater sustainability agents who are also the Board of Supervisors and county staff so that we are aware of your concerns and issues and can answer your questions as the process goes forward. Actually, can you move the slide up, please? So ground rules, we do expect in all of our meetings, of course, there's going to be less opportunity for more direct interaction because this is a remote Zoom meeting. But we want to indicate that everything is going to be in an attitude of mutual respect and collaboration. We're not making any decisions tonight. This is just an opportunity for us to hear from the public through the questions and comments, and for us to provide information to the public about the plan as it's in the current state of development. We are recording the meeting and we are keeping track of the questions and comments, and those will be included as part of the administrative record for the plan as we go forward. I would also like to point out that the workshops that we've had over the last 3 weeks are just one avenue for you to participate. All of our meetings of the advisory committee and the Groundwater Sustainability Agency are open to the public. You can comment on those. We accept written comments anytime, not just during these meetings, but anytime between now and the adoption of the plan, we will be accepting written comments. And if you have questions, please feel free. In fact, I strongly encourage you to contact Jameson or I so that we can provide that information that you're looking for or take in any additional comments you want to provide to us. Next slide, please, Ashley. So we're going to, out of respect for everybody's time, we want you to get out as much information as possible, but at the same time, we also want to hear from you. So we will have a brief presentation to what Sigma is all about that Jameson will be leading off. We will be talking about what a groundwater plan is and isn't with regards to what constitutes a plan and what isn't a part of the plan, and I'll be walking through that. We'll be talking about, then we'll take a quick break for questions. Jameson will come back and talk about the subbasin and a little bit more about Sigma. I'll come back and talk about how it affects communities. And we'll take another break for questions, then wrap up with a brief presentation by Reed about implementation and some closing comments from myself. And we will take additional questions at the end of the workshop. So that kind of lays everything out. And at this point, I would like to, oh, I'm sorry, one more slide, please. As I said, we've been working on this groundwater plan for the last 2 years, but that's not the extent of the county involvement in this issue. We've been collecting data since the 1960s, working in collaboration with the U.S. Geological Service and Department of Water Resources. Beginning 30 years ago, we started requiring a water availability analysis for different types of land use permits and subdivisions to see how groundwater being pumped may be affecting streams or nearby wells. And 20 years ago, the county adopted a groundwater conservation ordinance to provide general rules about groundwater pumping and to provide more specialized rules in areas where there was a noticed groundwater deficiency, such as the MST area out near Coombsville. There are very strict rules included in the ordinance to govern groundwater use out in Coombsville. And we've expanded that to also include the Northeast Napa area, just to the north of town and west of Silverado, and are looking at other areas as they become known to us, where there may be areas of groundwater deficiency that we need to take additional steps to address. And now I will turn it over to Jameson for the next part of the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Director Morrison. Ashley, can you advance the slide for us? Great, thank you. So yeah, good evening, everybody, and thank you again for joining us tonight. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to SGMA and familiarize you with a couple of acronyms that you're going to hear repeatedly tonight. So I would implore you to please try to burn these into your memory because you'll keep hearing them over and over. So it behooves you to try to get them in your brain now. The first of these acronyms is SGMA, or the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This was a California law passed in 2014 and is essentially the reason that we're here this evening. The second acronym you'll hear a lot is GSA, or Groundwater Sustainability Agency. They are the local public agencies who are empowered by SGMA to sustainably manage groundwater in their respective subbasins. And I'll tell you that the Napa Valley, we only have one groundwater subbasin here, the Napa Valley subbasin, and we only have one GSA. I'm aware of the fact that there are subbasins around the state that are managed by multiple GSAs, which sounds really tricky to me. So we're fortunate we don't have that condition here. And the third acronym you'll hear a lot is GSP. That's the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And that's essentially what the GSA will use to guide them toward the attainment of sustainability over the coming years. And it's what we would like to receive your questions and comments about tonight. Next slide. So where is the Napa Valley subbasin? In the map on your right, the blue area is the boundary of the subbasin. And you can see it more or less follows the valley floor outline, not quite exactly, and it coincides with the extent of alluvial deposits underlying the valley floor, which were laid down over 2.5 million years. And it's those alluvial deposits which are the primary water-bearing strata for our basin. Notably, the Napa Valley subbasin does not include the hillsides, the Carneros, the area around the Napa Valley Airport, or the city of American Canyon. Next slide. So how do we know if our subbasin is sustainable now, and how do we know if it will be sustainable in the future? In short, we use these 6 indicators to tell us if we are or will eventually be sustainable. The first of these, lowering of groundwater levels. Several of you indicated you have wells, so it won't be a surprise to you that in winter and spring, as rainwater infiltrates into the aquifer, your groundwater levels and your wells rise. And in the summer and fall, those groundwater elevations decline. That's perfectly natural. And of course, it's also natural to have interannual variability in groundwater levels. All of that is perfectly fine. What we're trying to avoid is a chronic lowering of groundwater over time that's above and beyond what you would consider and expect natural in a seasonal variability or annual variability situation. The second indicator is a reduction of groundwater storage. And that happens essentially if groundwater extraction occurs to such an extent that the pore spaces in between soil particles and in between different layers of rock shrink, you lose the storage capacity of the basin and it declines. And once it shrinks and declines, you really can't get it back. The third indicator is seawater intrusion, which is very simply a movement of salt water into a freshwater aquifer. On the coast, this can be a perfectly natural phenomenon. Here in a non-coastal situation, it can occur if groundwater extraction happens to such an extent that it pulls that salty water into a previously freshwater well. You'll be happy to note we have not noted any seawater intrusion in the Napa Valley subbasin. The next indicator is degraded water quality. Works kind of like seawater intrusion in the sense that if you are extracting water from a well to a certain extent, it kind of causes a gradient below ground to occur in the groundwater where it wants to move from one area to another. And if there happens to be subsurface contamination there, it can draw the contaminants into a well that was previously clean. The fifth is land subsidence. This is another indicator we're fortunate not, or problem we are fortunate not to have. And but you might have heard about it occurring in some Central Valley cities where subsidence has been measured, 10 to 20 to 30 feet in just a couple of years. The picture on the slide is the California aqueduct, and you can see that the concrete is not just cracked, but it's actually displaced. And that's because the ground underneath it simply shrunk away because the groundwater in the aquifer was pumped too excessively. And then last, but definitely not least, the depletion of interconnected streams. This occurs because in, I don't know all, but many cases, streams are hydraulically connected to the aquifers beneath them. And if you have a condition where an aquifer is sufficiently full, it will actually contribute water to the stream above it. And that's called a gaining reach of stream. And if you have a situation where the stream itself is flowing really high, it will contribute water to the aquifer below it. And that's called a losing reach of stream. And this is probably the indicator that's most sensitive to groundwater pumping. So it's a really important one. And it's one I can tell you our advisory committee is wrestling with right now, trying to find and define what level of stream flow depletion is considered, quote, significant and unreasonable, which is the bar that we are measured against. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Jameson. Next slide, please, and we'll get going on the next segment. So what is a groundwater sustainable plan? It has to consider all of the interests of beneficial uses and users of groundwater and interconnected surface water. I want to emphasize it has to consider all of the interests, not just one group. So in the Napa Valley subbasin, that includes disadvantaged communities, domestic well users for homes, urban water users, agricultural and industrial users, groundwater dependent ecosystems, and others. All of those have to be considered as a part of the plan and the and how to manage the subbasin appropriately, not just the focus of regulation or on how much water each group can have. Can't be managed just for the benefit of just one group. It has to be managed for the benefit of all. Next slide, please, Ashley. A groundwater sustainability plan does not affect or change water rights. Back in 2 weeks ago, we were asked the question about groundwater rights and how they work. There, we saw 3 different types of groundwater rights: appropriative, underlying, and prescriptive. Don't ask me to get into all the details of them. I'm not a water lawyer, although I probably need to go get a law degree if I keep on at this job. But there are different types of water rights, just as there are different types of surface rights. And the groundwater plan does not affect anybody's existing groundwater rights. It may affect how you use those rights, but it does not affect the rights themselves. The groundwater plan does not apply to people who use less than 2 acre-feet per year. These are called de minimis users, usually households and that have a well associated with them. That's not a decision necessarily of the county GSA, that's under state law. In the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the legislature specifically excluded these users from regulation. And lastly, it does not address existing conditions. So I know in other counties that I've worked in, Napa is the fourth county I've worked as a planner in. There are problems with boron, there's problems with arsenic, there's problems with salt, or there's problems with nitrates. The plan will not address those existing or background conditions, especially natural occurring ones, that it can only move forward with the basin as it is today, and then to ensure that it does not trigger any of those adverse conditions that Jameson referred to just previously. Next slide, please, Ashley. Water is a very popular topic right now in California, as I'm sure it is among many of you. There's a lot of different things going on with it, just as there are a lot of different agencies that touch upon it. As many of you may know, surface water is regulated solely by the Department of Water Resources. The county has no ability to exert any authority over surface water whatsoever. The state owns all water, period, end of story, both surface and groundwater. All water in California is owned by the state. Everybody has access and rights to the water, but this water is actually owned by the state of California. For surface water, that ownership is administered through the Department of Water Resources. For groundwater, in many cases, it's administered through the counties, which is what the legislature did by giving direction through SGMA to the counties about what they need to do to appropriately administer groundwater. For water discharges, for people putting things into water, such as septic systems or industrial discharge or even stormwater, those are regulated through State Water Resources Control Board, and sometimes through permits issued to cities and counties, especially with regards to stormwater. The groundwater plan isn't any of those things, except to deal with the groundwater basin in the Napa Valley, and only that groundwater basin. Doesn't affect surface water, doesn't address stormwater per se. There is a group of cities and the county who are working on a drought contingency plan. That is a list of capital improvement projects that look forward in terms of what do we need to build in the future. Not how can we manage the water we have right now, but where do we need to build dams? Where do we need to build canals? Where do we need to build recharge basins? Where do we need to build treatment plants? Where do we need to build pipelines? The drought contingency plan is in its draft form, and I'm still waiting for it to be released to the public, but it hasn't yet been. But that's an effort that's going on. That is not the groundwater sustainability plan. There's the county general plan, which sometimes has policy, in some cases has policies regarding water use, as well as land use. That is not this plan. The flood control district not only manages the stormwater permit for the cities and county, but it also administers the contracts from the State Water Project, whereby water is brought in from Oroville and Shasta through the North Bay Aqueduct and then distributed to the cities of Napa, Yountville, and Calistoga. This plan does not address the State Water Project or the flood control district responsibilities. There are plans to deal with climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This plan takes climate change into account, especially when it comes to modeling the groundwater basin in the future, but it does not address how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's in the climate action plan. That's not a part of this plan. And lastly, there are certainly water, especially groundwater, can affect ecosystems. As Jameson mentioned, it's one of the key indicators that this plan includes. But the species health and recoverability is usually addressed through something like a river management plan or a habitat management plan. That's not this plan. What this plan does is it looks at how do we focus on managing the groundwater within the Napa Valley, and it's all through that lens. What can help improve the sustainability or the reliability or the capacity of that aquifer, and what can damage it. And those are the lens through which all these other things are looked at. But the primary focus is on groundwater and only in the basin, as in the map that Jameson showed earlier. Next slide, please, Ashley. So what the plan does is we try to ensure that groundwater is here for all of the uses and users, as I mentioned earlier, not only now, but for the next generation and the generation after that. Not just us, but our children and grandchildren and the people who may move here in the future. We need to look at challenges like droughts, like mega droughts, like climate change, like sea level rise, and see what things we need to do to help the groundwater basin sustain or overcome those challenges. We need to protect vulnerable users, and we need to protect groundwater dependent ecosystems. Those are all things that we're required to do under the state directive. Next, please. So it's easy to say, these are things we need to do. What tools do we have to do those? Under the Sigma authority given to us by the legislature, the GSA may require the establishment or requirement that wells be metered. It can require that wells have pumping limits within the subbasin. It can charge fees to those users, either to properties or to people or to wells specifically. It can create additional requirements regarding well construction and spacing. The GSA can purchase properties of its own, and it can purchase equipment, and it can purchase surface water rights to allow for groundwater recharge or other activities to help manage the surface water basin, or sorry, the subbasin. Next, please, Ashley. So all these things have to come together in terms of tools and the ongoing science and modeling that we use to determine the health and quality of the basin and to figure out where there are challenges and what may need to be done to address those challenges. They all come together in the groundwater sustainability plan. The map here, you can see the Napa Valley subbasin outlined in black and highlighted in yellow in the center of that map. The areas around there are to show that these are all the areas that go into the modeling and study of the subbasin. Obviously, the tributaries that go into the Napa River all contribute to the subbasin. In some cases, rivers and streams recharge into the groundwater. In other cases, the groundwater recharges those surface water courses. Those are called gaining and losing reaches. Losing reaches is when water goes from the river or creek into the groundwater. Gaining reaches when the groundwater goes into the creek or river. So while our regulatory authority and our policies and actions only address the subbasin itself, we're studying a much larger area so that we have as complete and comprehensive a picture as possible of what the influences are on the subbasin, so that we can come up with the best course of action and have the best and the most accurate picture of what the subbasin looks like today and in the future. Next, please. A plan has a lot of pieces to it. We have 12 chapters outlined in the groundwater sustainability plan, many of which are done, not all of them. Some of them we will still be working on for the rest of this month and possibly more. But I won't read through them all, but these are the types of issues and sections that have to go into a groundwater plan, and why it's taken 2 years of very, very intensive effort because of the wide range of things that we need to look at and the depth of the details that need to be considered and evaluated. Next, please, Ashley. This is the same slide as the last one, but it does add the website there, tinyurl.com/Napa Valley GSPAC meetings. All of the sections that are drafted to date are available on that website, as well as links to the advisory committee meetings and other documents and information that have been accumulated over the last 2 years. If you want to delve into any of these subjects or topics deeper, or find the background or review the background documents to a lot of what we're working on. So all that is available at any time that you wish to connect up and make available of them. So if want to go to the next, this is the first time for questions. I see we have about 9 or 10, and let's go ahead and get started. Kelly gave us the easy one. Can we see the participants? So we're doing that. Thank you, Kelly, for pointing that out. And as we said earlier, some of the people logged in early and were listening to the back and forth as we were trying to resolve several technical issues before the meeting. And thank you for your patience. And it's like listening to a sound check at a concert. It's not the most exciting audio experience. We have a question about whether there's been any discussion about assessing landowners a fee or metering, like as what's been happening in Sonoma County. As I just mentioned, that is certainly an option that the Napa County GSA can take if they wish to. We're not there yet, and we may or may not be there. That will be certainly one management action that the GSA may decide to take in the future, depending on what the circumstances are, depending on whether any of the triggers have been exceeded, and we are on a pathway towards achieving an undesirable effect. There are 250 GSAs in the state of California. We're just one of the more recent ones, but there are hundreds of others. Some of them do require fees on property owners. Some of them are based on a kind of a per parcel fee. Some of them are based on estimated water use. Some of them require metering and base their fees on actual water use. No decision has been made about any of that in Napa County. I will say that right now, Napa County is funding this effort. Much of it is for the development of the GSP is coming out of a grant from the Department of Water Resources. About $2 million has gone towards development of the plan to date. The county has contributed another $500,000 plus towards this effort. As we move forward after the adoption of the plan in January, the grant will have been expended and the cost of it maintaining the GSP will be solely on the county. At that point, the county general fund will be supporting it. And that's a general fund that's paid into by people in Carneros and American Canyon and Mount Veeder and Pope Valley, and many people who may not necessarily see a direct benefit in terms of having general tax dollars go towards managing the subbasin. So I'm not going to tell you otherwise. It's an issue that may come up in the future, but there's been no discussion about it to date and nothing currently on the table towards that end. Right now, our focus is on getting the plan adopted and getting it to DWR so they can begin their certification review. We have a question about questions that were asked at the first two meetings and responses to those questions. We are working on that, and I'm going to ask Jameson, do we have an estimate on when we're going to be able to post those questions and answers? There's a lot of different things we're working on right now, and that's certainly one of them. And I know the public is interested in seeing what happened in the first two workshops, or to get answers to the questions we weren't able to answer previously. Jameson, do you have an idea about that?
Yeah, we're working on those right now, and I hope to be able to post them to the website on Monday.
Oh, that'd be
We'll
great.
have the questions and answers from the first two meetings. It might take us a little longer to document the ones from tonight, but we'll have the first two meetings up Monday, and we'll have the presentation themselves. In fact, we'll also email out to all the participants on the Zoom meeting and the two in-person meetings, the presentation itself, the FAQs document, which has a link to a survey that you can take if you want to submit comments, and also a document on the modeling effort, which Reed just shared in the chat box if you care to see it now. But we'll have all those posted early next week.
Okay, we have a comment about that the focus of the GSA is not surface waters, but the groundwater. And yes, I have said that. And as I reiterated it just now again, the GSA's focus is on groundwater. But one of the thresholds is how does groundwater, a part of groundwater goes into the waters and streams, and how is the groundwater being managed to ensure that those are sustainable as well. And as the commenter points out, one of the undesirable effects is the interconnection between groundwater and surface water, and that's correct. Surface water, the commenter says the surface water is pertinent and should be recognized as a bellwether of the condition of the groundwater. And I don't disagree. It's one of 6 pertinent and bellwether conditions of groundwater, not the only one. We have 6 different adverse impacts we need to look at, but it is one of them, and as such has a very high place in terms of how the groundwater basin needs to be managed. We have a question about how can there be a question about water when the state of California is discussing the possibility of rationing water. I don't think I've said we have enough water. I would love to see more water. I'm looking outside right now and the clouds look a little gray. I know that NOAA's forecast has said we might see a little bit of rain towards the end of this week. I would love for nothing more than to see some precipitation. I also have to point out that the long-range forecast that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has, it's an experimental weather forecast that looks out from 6 months to a year, is showing a more than a 50% chance that we will have a below average rainfall again this winter. And including an additional possibility, we may have below average for next winter in 22-23. Most of our reservoirs are at between 20 and 60% capacity. Many of the state reservoirs that we depend upon are at 20 to 30% capacity. The groundwater basin has, again, the groundwater basin spans 15, 20 miles. It doesn't act as a single entity. There's a lot of variability within that large geographic area. But overall, the groundwater basin has certainly lost storage in the last year or two. And we are closely monitoring that. And we need rain, we need water. I don't think anybody's saying that we have enough water. And really, it makes the management of the water we do have ever more critical and important. We have a question about what GSA manages the Buda Creek watershed. Not every watershed has a GSA. GSAs are established by the legislature. The groundwater basin for the Napa Valley the GSA for the Napa Valley subbasin is dictated by the state. There is a surveyor's description of the boundaries of that basin. Any changes that would have to go back through the legislature, the Assembly and the Senate. It's a legally defined boundary. And DWR and the legislature have only established two, one for the sub-valley, one for the Napa Valley, and the other for the Carneros region. The Carneros region is considered a low priority basin. A GSA is not required, or a plan is not required for the Carneros area. The Napa Valley is considered a high priority area, and a groundwater sustainability plan is required for the Napa Valley subbasin. Additional subbasins for groundwater sustainability agencies have not been identified in Napa County, and so there is no one for the Buda Creek watershed, at least at this time. We have a question about why is a supermajority required on the advisory committee who established the policy, and what other committees have a supermajority. The policy was established through the bylaws, which were adopted by the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, whose members are the Board of Supervisors. The reason why it was done is because these are policies that affect a lot of different people, a lot of different uses. And having a 50% plus one majority is not going to help try and create the broad consensus that we need so that we can all live together. I mean, yes, 5 of my friends and I can outvote, you and your 4 friends. But that means that a 50-50 split is not ideal, as we see in so many parts of our society already. We're evenly divided on so many issues, and there's a lot of conflict as a result. By requiring a supermajority, it encourages policies and plans and actions that enjoy a broader support from a wider variety and more diverse interest groups within the public, and has a greater chance to succeed and a greater chance to create less conflict and to ensure that a wider variety of and more diverse range of interests are reflected and addressed adequately. I haven't done a review or survey of all of the advisory committees in Napa County. I really can't answer that. APAC was a supermajority. There are times when the Board of Supervisors, when they're acting legislatively on some types of ordinances or fees or taxes, or in cases where the board is making recommendations or taking actions on regional issues, a 4/5 vote or even a unanimous vote may be required. So it's not unheard of. The same applies to certain types of state actions within the legislature. So it's not, I would say it's uncommon, but it's not unheard of. And it is a very useful technique in trying to, again, get broad-based policy that can benefit the widest range and number of people and uses as possible, and will create a more lasting and more, I think, more effective management strategy. Yeah, I know I say yeah, sorry about that. I'm not a professional speaker, as you can probably tell. Actually, to be honest, I had to take a number of classes to learn how to even do this much. So I appreciate that. I'm still a work in progress. So we have a comment that says that Sigma describes Sigma lays out the undesirable results, and the GSAs have to define them in their own local way, reflecting local conditions. That is correct. The commenter talks about liability and averaging of data, why liability is in these descriptions, and why is it in there. It also talks about why liability or detrimental results fall on the GSA rather than responsible parties. Are the taxpayers, voters, or Napa County considered to be responsible when they are not the responsible parties? I would guess I would throw open the question to Reed or Vicky if they can answer about the liability and averaging of data. That's something I can't answer. With regard to the GSA is the responsible party for ensuring that the basin is managed adequately. That's why it's been given the legal authority to take the broad range of actions that it is able to take. And so they're the ones who are going to be held accountable. Ultimately, if the GSA does not appropriately or adequately manage the Napa Valley subbasin, the state through DWR has the legal ability to take over direct management of that basin. And so all decisions made regarding groundwater in the Napa Valley would be made by DWR in Sacramento. There would be no local input into that process. We could make comments, but decisions would be made in Sacramento if we are not able to clearly manage the basin in a way that meets all the state requirements. So that burden is placed on the GSA, and the responsibility for ensuring that is placed on the GSA. And if there are people within the basin who are not following the requirements to allow for the basin to be managed appropriately, then it is the responsibility of the GSA to take appropriate enforcement actions on those people to ensure that, again, that the basin as a whole is managed appropriately within and consistent with the plans. Does somebody else on the team want to talk about the averaging of data and liability issue? If not, that may be something we have to come back to as a written response next week.
I'd like to offer a comment. I believe that the reference to liability may be to those regulated sites that are under the purview of a number of different agencies. And in the discussion of the degradation of water quality and how to avoid that as an undesirable result, it is within the purview of the GSA not to duplicate what falls under other agencies, but to ensure that basin management and also things like projects and management actions such as recharge projects, that they don't cause the mobilization of contamination or otherwise interfere with the control of that contamination by the regulated party.
I'll take a couple more questions and then we'll move on to the next section of the presentation. If I haven't gotten to your questions, we will get into it in the next question segment, as well as any new questions are offered. I just don't want to, I want to make sure that everybody who is tuning in this meeting has the ability to hear the whole presentation so that everybody, the people who are giving up their personal time to hear the presentation, I want to make sure they have that opportunity. But again, I also want to make sure we get to all the questions. So we will be getting to all the questions. So I'll take one or two more. We have a question. I have a spring on my property that drains the storm drain. Can I use this water or put it back in the ground for credit? It depends on what you use the water for. You can use the water. We have a number of domestic homes and other users who do use spring water as their primary source of drinking water. It has to be permitted through the county, especially if it's being used for drinking water. You could use it for irrigation. Certainly you can, depending on whether you have water rights to that water. In terms of getting credit, that's something that the GSA has not established. We don't have an adopted groundwater sustainability plan yet, but creating a market for credits in the future is something that is an option under the groundwater plan and something that may be more likely in the future. We have a question about trucked water, trucked labeled potable water filling their tanks from hydrants around town. That's something that is very common here in Napa. I must admit, I haven't seen it in some of the other jurisdictions I've worked. What happens is that there are a number of private water haulers. These are private companies who obtain water in various local sources. Sometimes it's from city municipal services. Sometimes it's from, it may be from private users. They fill up their trucks and they take them to people who need water. A number of landowners have wells that run dry or wells that run low. There are people who may have vineyards or other types of agriculture landscaping that may want that water. And so it's trucked from where the water is to where the water is needed. That's the story of California right there. Napa, the people here in Napa and the city of Napa and the other cities don't drink water that comes from Napa. We all drink water that comes from Oroville and Shasta and maybe New Melones or San Luis Reservoir. The people in LA drink water from the Colorado River and from Mono Lake and other areas. We all drink water that isn't necessarily local water. We take water in California from where it is to where it's needed. And so water trucks do that as well. Water trucks have been the subject of a lot of discussion with the city of Napa, and the city council took action in July to place further restrictions through contracts with water haulers on how they may use that water. It is not regulated by the county or by other entities that I'm aware of. And so it's a pretty widespread practice. We don't know the exact extent of it. The city of Napa has estimated that they sell about 60 to 70 acre feet of water per year through truck water. We don't know where the truck water is going in many cases. So it is something that it happens. If it's water's coming from the city, then that's coming from surface water, again, coming from Oroville or Shasta. It may not necessarily be groundwater, but there may be other times where people are taking groundwater. We just don't know. Last question for this segment. What if I have a working well that is not recorded? There's plenty of wells like that. We know that there are a couple thousand wells where we do have permits within the Napa Valley subbasin. But wells weren't required in Napa. I'm sorry, permitting wasn't required for wells in Napa probably till about the 1960s or maybe 1970s. Napa County was formed in 1850, so there was more than a century went by of people creating and digging and constructing wells without any permits. There's no current requirement that you do anything with a working well that is not recorded. Again, some GSAs have required everyone who has a well to record their well with the county, so the county can at least know how many wells are within the subbasin. That could be something that may happen here in the future. Again, that these decisions haven't been made, but right now, as of today, there's no requirement for you to do anything with your well. If you have a working well, I'd say if you have a working well and you're getting water in this current climate year, good for you, and I'd be thankful for that. Let's stop right here and go on to the next segment. Like I said, we will be coming back to the remaining questions and any more that people want to submit for the rest of this workshop.
I do want to remind folks that comments should be placed in the chat function, the chat box, and questions only should be placed in the Q&A function. So please make sure that when you are typing in a comment that you are in the chat function and not the Q&A function. That will help the meeting run a little bit more smoothly. Thank you.
Jameson, you want to take the next segment?
Sure do. That's fine. Yes. Ashley, next slide, please. Okay, so as we have already mentioned several times, the GSA is the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. They are the governing board for the Napa Valley subbasin. They're comprised of the Napa County Board of Supervisors, and it's the GSA's responsibility to submit the plan, approve the plan, and submit it to the state, to Department of Water Resources by January 31st of 2022. And they appointed an advisory committee to help them write the draft GSP. Next slide, please. So our GSP advisory committee, who are they? They are a 25-member panel, again, appointed by the GSA. They're essentially, I would say, probably your friends, your neighbors, your fellow community members who have stepped up and volunteered to participate in writing this plan, which has turned out to be a pretty arduous process. And I've only been involved peripherally for the last few months. So they have worked very hard on this. They've actually met 17 times since July 2020, and we've got a few meetings left to go. So the committee is made up of, well, you can read the groups that are represented on the right side of the screen, But essentially, we have about 7 members who represent our sub-basin cities, 1 town, and our public water systems. We have 5 representatives on the committee who represent environmental users of groundwater, and we have 8 members who represent groundwater and service rights holders. And then last but not least, we have 5 members who represent the public at large. And they are writing the nitty-gritty of this plan. Again, they've met numerous times over the last year and a half. Every meeting is at least 2 to 3 hours long. They receive voluminous materials ahead of time. They receive very tactical presentations during the meetings, and they have to wrestle with some pretty difficult topics and weighty decisions. And we really have to, I hope we will all appreciate the effort that they have put forward on really all our behalf and the sub-basin's behalf and all the residents' behalf. And I think we have several members actually participating tonight in the advisory committee. I wish they could stand up and you could see them and recognize them. Again, I'm sure you would know some of them, but if you'll permit me, I'd like to just say who I saw in our attendees tonight. We have our chair, David Graves. We have John Ferrens, Lester Hardy, Jerry Hansen, Michelle Benvenuto, and Paul Warnock. So that's just 6 of our 25 members. And unfortunately, the one downside of Zoom is they can't hear the applause that they got a round of applause at our public meetings, and I wish we could give that to them now and they could hear it. But please, if you know them or meet them later, please give them your appreciation for their efforts on this committee. Next slide. So the sustainability goal is simple, but if you'll permit me, I am going to read it because I don't want to mess it up. It's simply to protect and enhance groundwater quantity and quality for all beneficial uses and users of groundwater and interconnected surface water in the Napa Valley subbasin, both now and in the future. And the GSA will use the best available science, the best available information, and a process of what we call adaptive management to manage the basin. That's probably familiar with that term. It essentially means we will apply management actions to the problem. We'll measure their effect on the basin. And if we need to do more actions to improve the sustainability of the basin, we will. And they will kind of keep going until they reach that sustainability goal within 20 years of the GSP adoption. Next slide, please. So the process for adopting a GSP, as I said, we've already been hard at work at that for the last year and a half. We expect to publish a final draft GSP late this month. And then our GSA will meet twice in December to consider adoption of the final plan. And then we have to submit it to the state by January 2022. We've really taken comments on the plan for, well, we are taking comments now up until the point we adopt the plan, but we have sought and received comments as far back as August of 2020. So you are invited to comment. Of course, tonight we have a survey link that we'll share at the end of the meeting and also will be provided to you by email after tonight's meeting, that you can go into the survey and provide your comments there. You can come to our GSA meetings on December 7th and 14th and provide public comment at those meetings. You can participate in the advisory committee meetings, which I believe David already mentioned. So there are a number of ways to provide comment, and we'd like to invite you to utilize any and all of those. And then finally, once it is sent to Department of Water Resources, they will have their own 60-day comment period in which you can submit comments directly to them. Next slide, please. This reviews graphically and visually what I've sort of already touched on, but I think it shows it really conveniently. Again, we commenced work about middle of 2020 and fairly quickly drafted the first 5 sections of the plan, along with a stakeholder engagement plan. And then in 2021, been working on a couple more sections of the plan and also defining a number of things like undesirable results, our minimum thresholds, our measurable objectives. In the next couple of weeks, we are going to wrap up and deliver 4 more sections of the plan. 7 through 11. And again, adopting it, considering for adoption at the GSA in December, and then sending to the state in January. Next slide. And back to you, Director Morrison.
Okay, next slide, please, Ashley. So I know some of these points are kind of have already been made before, but we will continue to make them because they are very, very important. The plan provides a framework for coordination between groundwater management and land use policies. The plan gives the GSA the authority to take the actions that may be needed later on. We've had comments in other workshops or other meetings about why doesn't the county or why doesn't the GSA just do this or that? Well, because we're not dictators. We have to have a basis for why we take actions. We're not the governor. We can't just go out and sign executive orders. There has to be a lot of forethought put into it. There has to be, and hopefully in most cases, scientific study put behind it, and then a public policy discussion and debate about that so that we can then take those actions. We can't just decide to wake up tomorrow and say, okay, everybody has to do this, or everybody has to do that. This is part of the public process and part of the role of government and how government works. The plan will provide a foundation for the actions, policies, and regulations that may be needed to ensure water supply reliability and groundwater protection. That's why this discussion is so important, because it will lay the foundations for the future. Next, please, Ashley. So some of the actions that could be taken by the plan or by the GSA pursuant to the plan in the future would include more water conservation, managed aquifer recharge, which you touched on a little bit about already, to put more water into the basin. That was something that I worked on with the Cache Creek restoration plan over in Yolo County. And as I mentioned, something that, for instance, the city of Fresno practices very aggressively. Expanded recycled water use. I think one of the success stories of Napa has been the recycled water program from Napa Sanitation, who takes treated wastewater and makes it available for property owners to use in landscaping and for some types of agriculture. The treated wastewater can't be used for drinking water. Doesn't meet those standards, but by using it for landscaping and agriculture, it can reduce the water demand that would otherwise be taken up by pumping from the groundwater. Next slide, please. As I've mentioned before, we can do pumping reductions if it gets to that point. Hopefully it won't. And we can place additional restrictions on groundwater use and well construction through an ordinance or through new conditions for permitting. All well permits are issued by the county, even wells within the cities, and there are wells within each of the cities, or many of the cities. All of those wells are permitted through the county and regulated by the county. And we're back to the next question segment, I believe, Ashley. Okay, I wanted to address one question that was made in the chat earlier that wasn't included in the question and answer section. Does the plan affect applications for new construction? Not at this time. Again, those are things that may be needed in the future, depending on how difficult the situation gets or how dire the needs are of the groundwater basin. But that is not something that is currently under consideration. That would really be more a function of placing limitations or restrictions on groundwater use. I also have to note, however, it came up in one of the earlier workshops that people have said, well, we just need to stop development. Well, that's not an option. While this is one state mandate, it's certainly not the only one. The Housing and Community Development Department has issued their housing numbers for the Bay Area region. The Association of Bay Area Governments has taken that number and allocated amongst the various jurisdictions. For the unincorporated part of Napa County, the entire county, we need to provide about 1,000 new homes over the next 8 years. For the city of Napa, it's about 2,000 homes. For the other cities, it's about another 700 to 900 homes or so. So roughly, over the next 8 years, the 5 cities in the county need to produce about 3,000 homes. So we can't stop development. In fact, we're under state mandate to find ways to allow it, to provide housing for the people who move here and for the people who are born here and have new families. So it's a matter of how we use the resource. Stopping development is an easy answer, but it's not an answer that we can take advantage of because we have other competing mandates from the state. And so it's just a question of how we can be smarter about managing what we have. We have a question about the person says they live in the hills above Calistoga. Will their well be affected in or included in this plan? Generally, not uniformly, because the boundary established by the legislature doesn't exactly follow lines. Generally, the basin follows the Napa Valley floor. If you live in the hillsides, then this plan will not apply to you, but we will be looking at, again, at how the hillsides affect the basin. So if you're not on the valley floor, generally speaking, you're probably not included within this groundwater plan. Someone asks how they know what their well use is compared to their neighbors. I would say talk to your neighbors. We don't monitor all wells currently. Some wells are monitored. Many, not all, of the wells in Coombsville and the MST area are monitored, but again, not all of them. Some wells that have been approved through the use of associated with wineries or other discretionary use permits are monitored, but again, not all of them. We don't know what each well is pumping or how much is removed from the groundwater aquifer. So if you want to know that, I would say go talk to your neighbors and ask them. The commenter also says that they are on a 2-year well water level survey. That's a phrase I'm not familiar with. I'd ask Jameson or Vicki Reed, do any of you have more information about that?
I'm sorry, Director Morrison, I was reading one of the questions in the chat and about to try to respond to it. Can you repeat your question?
The commenter states that they are on the county 2-year well water level survey. I'm not sure what that refers to.
I think it's probably referring to the twice a year groundwater level measurements. I mean, Reed would know, this particular individual, but that would be my guess as to what that question was about.
Yeah, there's a lot of different surveys and water monitoring that we do. I'm just not familiar with how it's described here. I would certainly encourage the commenter to please contact James and I. We'd be happy to discuss that with you further. What's the current breakdown of usage among groups of different users in the county? Again, we're not looking at the entire county, we're just looking at the sub-basin. Generally, the majority of water within the sub-basin is estimated to be used by agricultural irrigation. I'd say that's roughly about 2/3 of it, more or less. Another quarter or so is used by businesses and homes within the sub-basin. And then a smaller portion is used by environmental users for groundwater dependent ecosystems as water goes back into the rivers. And finally, there's a small amount, maybe 2-3%, that is pumped by the city of St. Helena and used for municipal water purposes for the city. Does the county approval of new developments and wineries require estimates of water use? Yes, they do. That's the water availability analysis. Depending on where the well is located, whether if it's located close to other wells, if it's located close to a stream or a river, or if it's in an area where we already know that there are groundwater problems, then additional analysis may be required. And so that's typically an analysis that's included within the application and considered by staff and the zoning administrator planning commission when making a decision. We are in the process of updating the water availability analysis to reflect some of the more recent conditions as we are in the second year of a drought. And so I hope to have a public draft of those revised guidelines out later this month. We're also looking at making changes to groundwater ordinance to reflect the recommendations of the Groundwater Resources Advisory Committee made several years ago that have not yet been codified. So we're in the process of bringing those recommendations into the groundwater ordinance as well. I suspect there will be a lot of changes in the coming months and years regarding water, especially if we do not have a good rainfall year this winter or heaven forbid the following year. One recent change was the state legislature approved and the governor signed a bill that requires the county to form a drought and water conservation task force. in the next several months, and we're working on that, and they will be working on a drought and water conservation plan. So the level of policy and regulatory changes is very rapid right now. And please stay informed, please stay in contact with us. As these changes continue to work their way through the various processes. Question, will cities like St. Helena be able to enact their own rules and regulations regarding groundwater? They certainly may, but they may not have, they could form a separate GSA if they so choose. They chose not to. The county extended the offer for the cities to participate in the GSA, and they chose not to. So in that, since they did not, then the county, or the GSA in this respect, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, has the County Board of Supervisors and is staffed and funded solely by the county at this point. And as such, any decisions made by the GSA regarding groundwater would also apply to within the cities. There's a question about who regulates private water sales and trucking from wells and reservoirs. There isn't any. If that water is used for potable water, the water haulers themselves are regulated to make sure that the tanks, the water trucks are meet health and safety standards for moving drinking water. As I mentioned earlier, the city council for the city of Napa has placed some restrictions about through contract with the water haulers about how they may or may not use that water. But beyond that, there's not a lot of regulation regarding the movement of water from one parcel to the other. Comment that it's a shame the questions and answers from the first two meetings are not yet available. I agree. I have to point out, though, that Jameson and many of the team and I, this is the third Wednesday night in a row that we've been working. You may not know, but it's not uncommon for Jameson and I to have meetings on Saturday and Sunday mornings with our consultant team. We're working as furiously as we can because there is just so much to do to finish up the groundwater sustainability plan. It's not through a lack of effort or trying. We're trying to get everything out to as many people as quickly as we can. But there are limits on how much we can do. But as Jameson said, we hope we will have that out Monday, and I apologize for that. I would like it to be out sooner. Is recycled water used for recharging the subbasin? Not currently, to my knowledge. I think most of the recycled water goes towards landscaping and agricultural irrigation. I think that is a very valuable use because the cost of pumping that water or purchasing the water or bringing it in from other places is much more expensive. And so I think that the recycled water coming from Napa Sand is barely being put to its highest and best use with regards to the demand. The demand for recycled water far exceeds the supply. If there was more recycled water, there are many more landowners out there waiting in line to use it. So I hope that we get to a point where we have such an excess surplus of recycled water that we can use it to recharge the groundwater basin. But I think especially with the current drought, we're not there at that point yet. Question as to why surface water rights holders have seats on the advisory committee when the plan only addresses groundwater, for the same reason that people on the advisory committee represent groundwater dependent ecosystems, even though the groundwater dependent ecosystems rely on surface water. Surface water coming from groundwater, just as surface water rights may in part be affected by groundwater inputs from the aquifer into the stream or river from which they're pulling their surface water rights out of. And so again, to try and make sure that we have a completed picture and represent all the various interests who have a stake in this, in the outcome of this discussion and the success of these policies, the GSA chose to include representation for surface water rights holders. We have a comment about the meetings of the advisory committee being compressed in the final months to present the results. That is true. We are working under a deadline established by the state. DWR has indicated that we must submit an approved groundwater sustainability plan before January 31st, 2022. That leaves us roughly 4 months. And during that time, the Groundwater Advisory Committee has to complete its work. Then it has to go to public hearings in front of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. where there'll be another opportunity for public comment as well as public comment during the advisory committee meetings. And then we have to, there's a certain series of sequences and formats that we have to submit the groundwater plan to DWR, and those all have to be done after the groundwater plan has been approved. So 4 months is not very much time. Some of the debates have been extensive, which I think is an indicator of the health of the process and the passions of the people involved in representing their very interest in trying to come to a fair and equitable outcome for everyone. You know, the problem, I think the problems that the person asked, what are the problems that requires this compression? I would say the compressed timeline. We weren't given as much time as other GSAs have been given to prepare the plan by the state. The amount of work it takes to do a GSP, while we had a lot of good fundamentals with the alternative plan the county had previously submitted to DWR, the alternative plan does not meet all the requirements of a GSP, and there is a magnitude of effort needed to move from that alternative plan to a GSP. And so given the short time and the large amount of work, it's required more. There hasn't been enough time. And so we've also wanted to make sure that we give enough time for the committee to do its work, and that there's been, as Jameson mentioned, extensive debate regarding the interconnected surface water issue. And we hope that we can come to resolution on that so we can finish the remaining portions and forward the recommendation of the advisory committee to the Groundwater Sustainability Agency so they can deliberate the final product. Question: can policy change ensure groundwater sustainability include deforestation in the watersheds? No, our land use authority lies with the county, not with the GSA. Right now, those are the same, but in many GSAs, the GSA is a separate independent water agency. There may come a time when this GSA becomes a separate agency from the county. The county holds water land use authority, not the GSA. Even within the subbasin, the GSA cannot exert land use authority. All it can do is regulate the groundwater, not the use of the groundwater. The amount of the groundwater being used can be regulated, but not what that water is used for per se. With regards to land use outside of the subbasin, that is strictly a county requirement. And so the GSA does not have the authority to make any decisions about that. Comment that homes are not the issue and the volumes of water used. Everything is the issue. I'm going to keep coming back to this point. There is no bad guys and good guys. Everybody is using, not everybody, many different landowners and uses are using the groundwater. Incrementally, they are all contributing to the success. Incrementally, they're all contributing to the problem. And solutions will involve everybody. It's the only way we're going to be able to make this work. Dividing people up into camps saying you're the bad guy and you need to stop doing bad things and we're the good guy and we need to keep doing good things is not going to lead to a solution. And all it will lead is to ongoing litigation that will again prevent the basin from being managed appropriately. Is there a separate GSA for the Carneros area? No, one is not required. The Carneros area, as I mentioned earlier, has a low priority currently as designated by DWR, and that is calculated using about 10 to 15 or so criteria. And so a GSA is not required for the Carneros area. If in the future the DWR changes that from a low to a medium or high priority, then we would begin the same process for Carneros, forming a GSA and beginning work on a groundwater sustainability plan. The last question I have at this point, then we'll move to the final segment, concerning the monitoring question about wells, the Calistoga area. They point out that a good response would be to local discussion and collaboration. Certainly encourage that. I can't go out and require that, but I think the more that neighbors talk to each other, the more that they work together, the better off they are. A lot of times, we're involved in numerous conflicts between neighbors, whether it's noise, whether it's groundwater use, whether it's being able to see somebody's house and from their view shed, whether it's a proposed vineyard, whether it's a proposed winery, all kinds of things that there are all kinds of issues within which neighbors don't get along. And one of the first things that PBS staff tell neighbors when they come in, whether it's code compliance or there's somebody is proposing a new use. Have you talked to your neighbors? And that's one of the first things the planning commission will say as well. I wish more people would talk directly to one another rather than trying to go through the channels of government. I think they will find they have more in common. I think that they are the closest ones to the problem. They're the ones who have the resources that are most immediately accessible on the ground to that problem. And they're the ones who are best suited to be able to find solutions to that problem. So I can't require that everybody get along, but I would wish that, but I certainly, it's something I heartily encourage as a way. Not everything has to go through government. The public can address some of these issues themselves. And I think that actually results in better solutions. Is it something we will recommend? Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm never going to discourage discussion or communication. That's what society is all about. Should the GSA assist by requiring all neighbors to place meters on their wells? That's one of the questions that the GSA will have to answer at some point. And publish the results. All well metering, there was a change in state law about 2 or 3 years ago. Prior to that, well logs were proprietary and were not public information. The state changed that, so all well logs are now proprietary. And so yes, any metering data would become public information in that sense if it was required. I agree. The final comment is transparency is a good solution. I fully agree. Napa County and the GSA both are fully committed to transparency. That's why we're doing this workshop. That's why we're answering these questions. That's why we're posting these documents. That's why we're posting the answer to these questions, hopefully on Monday. That's why we are divulging all of the minutes and making all meetings open to the public. The transparency is absolutely the best course and one that we will continue to take in the future. So let's wrap up the final segment here. Not everybody may want to spend all night at this. For one, it's my 20th anniversary, and I'm sure my wife would like to see me sometime tonight, but I will stay here as long as needed to answer any questions that we have following this last segment. And I'll turn it over to Reed, who can start off with our next portion of slides.
I also wanted to remind folks once again that comments should go in the chat box. Please, to keep our meeting going quickly, comments in the chat box and questions only in the question and answer box. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Reed Bryson. I'm a hydrologist with Bludorf and Scalmanini Consulting Engineers. And with that note from Director Morrison, I'm going to be as quick as I can be through these last 3 slides. It shouldn't take too long. So Ashley, if you could go ahead. So several times tonight, you've heard that the GSA must be implemented, or the GSA must implement the groundwater sustainability plan to achieve the sustainability goal within 20 years. But implementation begins after the GSP is adopted and has a 5-year recurring schedule. And it's important, I think, to understand that the implementation process will be part of what is referred to in much of the guidance from the state regarding the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act as an adaptive management framework. So in broadest terms, GSP implementation entails 4 components: outreach and communication. That's currently guided by the stakeholder communication and engagement plan that the GSA adopted late last year, and was one of the first products that the advisory committee worked on. Projects and management actions, which Director Morrison also described earlier, are the tools that the GSA uses to achieve the sustainability goal and to manage the subbasin to sustainability criteria that are defined in the GSP. Monitoring and data management, also very important, and inform the management process going forward and decisions that the GSA will need to make about projects and management actions. And the 4th component is really reporting. It's meant to inform decision makers and stakeholders, and is also something that the county has undertaken since 2014, with annual reports since that date, which are provided on the GSA website now. And even since 2017, those annual reports have included information on water use, groundwater use, surface water use, recycled water use in the subbasin. So already meeting some of the requirements that are required for annual reports under SGMA in those reports since 2017. And then the annual reports continue into the future, and then there's a requirement under SGMA for a 5-year GSP evaluation report that the GSA would develop and submit to the state to reflect any new information or new understanding about the subbasin that's developed over the course of implementation. And then lastly on this slide is the note about the GSP review, which has been mentioned. So after the GSA adopts a GSP and submits it to the state, the Department of Water Resources has 2 years to conduct their review, and that's performed or spelled out in the GSP regulations from the state as to how that's conducted. And then there's an opportunity for the GSA to address any comments from DWR after that review. So next slide, please. This slide just shows the 9 monitoring networks that are described in Section 5 of the GSP. These reflect monitoring to be conducted by the GSA, as well as opportunities to leverage data collected by other entities, including the State Department of Water Resources, State Water Resources Control Board, and the U.S. Geological Survey, many of which have been collecting data in Napa Valley for many decades, as has the county. And so all of the monitoring is designed to address the 6 sustainability criteria described in SGMA. And there will be a need to continue and expand monitoring that's been occurring. So next slide, please. Oh, Ashley, could you go ahead? Thank you. So with the monitoring networks, obviously the monitoring informs management actions that the GSA takes. SGMA also has a provision to allow GSAs to establish representative monitoring sites where the required measurable criteria for the 6 sustainability indicators are set. And these include wells, but also other types of sites, stream gauges, and even surveying benchmarks for the purposes of tracking land subsidence. This slide shows 32 proposed representative monitoring sites for groundwater levels throughout the subbasin. These are wells, as you might imagine. The slide also shows 28 other wells that are currently monitored in the subbasin, and those provide additional data that are reported on as part of the annual reports and provide additional understanding about conditions in the subbasin. And actually, the county is actively working now to install new monitoring wells and acting on a commitment to expand monitoring that was made really as part of the general plan update in 2009. And you know, as opportunities arise to either recruit new wells into the monitoring network volunteered by well owners or construct new monitoring wells, those opportunities will be taken. So that's all I have on these slides. I think the next slide goes back to Director Morrison.
We're constantly looking for ways, you can read. We are constantly looking for ways to improve the plan. Again, here's some more web links where you can see the draft plan, participate in any surveys, and see the post-meeting comments, which will be posted on Monday. Jameson's email is listed there. My email is much the same, david.morrison, M-O-R-R-I-S-O-N, @countyofnapa.org. You can also contact us here at the offices. I find it really amazing that some people are surprised. We've been open every day for the last 1.5 years here at the offices. I've been in it, except for I think 3 or 4 days I was sick, and a week or two that I took on vacation. I've been in the office every day throughout the pandemic. Our offices have been open the entire time, and you can come and talk to Jameis and I in person if you'd like to, or send us an email or give us a phone call. What happens next is that we have the remaining advisory committee meetings through October. We are looking at the possibility of extending them briefly into November in order to finish the work of the committee if necessary. And we expect that the Groundwater Sustainability Agency will be meeting to consider plan adoption on December 7th and December 14th. And then, as I said earlier, we will be submitting the plan once it's adopted to DWR in January. Once DWR receives the plan, they have 2 years. Notice we have less than 2 years to prepare the plan, but they have 2 years to review it. The DWR will be reviewing the plan for a 2-year period. We are required to update the plan in 5 years. So DWR will have until 2024 to make comments on the plan. By 2029, we will have to adopt it. I'm sorry, by 2027, we'll have to adopt a new plan. So basically, by the time we get DWR comments on the 2022 plan, we're probably already going to be starting work on the update to the 2027 GSB. There's a requirement that we update it every 5 years. This is an ongoing work in progress. As new data becomes available, it will be incorporated into the plan. As modeling becomes better, or there are more extensive or detailed models available, we will fold those into the plan as well. This is not the first step. This is not the last step. This is the first step. Ashley, if you have one more, please. Again, the plan is important because groundwater is important to us. That's what supplies most of the vineyards, homes outside of the cities, and businesses on the valley floor. It's also important to ensuring that that some of the water goes towards the riparian systems and some of the recreation that we enjoy here in the waters and in the streams and rivers. It protects wells and groundwater users. It maintains local control, as I mentioned earlier. If we're not successful with the groundwater plan, then the state has the option. They may not necessarily exercise it, but they have the option of administering the groundwater basin instead, in which case both agency representatives and legislators and the governor will be deciding what happens to the water. By preparing this plan, it makes us eligible for more grants and other benefits. Those grants help reduce the need for taxes or fees locally. So again, the $2 million that we've received in DWR grant funding so far is $2 million does not have to come directly out of local taxpayers' pockets. And so having a plan to be able to qualify for more grants is important so that we can do all the work that may be necessary of constructing new wells, of monitoring a growing number of wells within the network, and continuing to fund the study to see how the model is working, what the data that we receive can inform the model, and to start identifying problems before they occur. And of course, it coordinates with other planning purposes, all those ones that I mentioned earlier, such as the drought contingency plan, the drought and water conservation plan, the general plan, the climate action plan, and others. With that, I think we've come to the end of the presentation. I appreciate everybody tonight. Ashley, we have a few more questions. Did you want to answer the question about how many people have attended tonight?
Yes, we've had approximately 40. Some people have come and gone, but approximately 40 people have been with us this evening.
And we appreciate all of you. There's so many other things you could be doing right now, spending time with your family, streaming entertainment, going out and volunteering for the community, just enjoying the weather. We have a 40% chance of rain Friday. I hope that comes to pass. But we do appreciate the time you've been spending with us on this very important issue. Last two comments I see up in the question and answer room or the chat room. I'm going to check on the chat room. Yeah. Last two comments I see or questions. Compliments to David and Jameson. I appreciate that. We try really hard. It's always nice when those efforts are appreciated. Some of the answers are selective and missing some of the real issue discussions. I don't know, I'd use the word selective, I'd probably say abbreviated. Again, because this is a very complicated and detailed and extensive topic, to get to all the things we want to try and cover tonight and to answer all the 30 plus questions that have been and comments we've received. To do it justice would require just a small amount of the hundreds of hours that have already gone into this plan already. And so we have to abbreviate it so that everybody can have the benefit of hearing everything that we want to cover tonight and that you want to ask about. And again, that's why we encourage people to submit additional comments or questions or concerns to us so that we can take advantage of those that may not be made available through the constraints of the workshop we have tonight. Last comment, Reed mentioned that DWR has 2 years to review the GSA. And the comment mentions that 4 GSPs have been evaluated, 2 have been accepted and 2 have been rejected. That's correct as far as I know. Although Vicki or Reed may want to jump in, I think those numbers may be a little bit different. Analysis of the reasons for rejection or acceptance would be useful to the public. I agree. We've asked Vicki and Reed to look at those. Vicki or Reed, do either of you want to comment about the number of plans that have been accepted or rejected today? Are there GSPs that have been accepted or rejected to DWI date, and any of the reasons for why those that were rejected were not certified?
I'll start and then Reed may want to add some. Just for clarification, none have been outright rejected. There are 2 that have letters requesting clarification and more information, and DWR has messaged to those GSAs and those basins that they are coordinating with those entities to try and work out what the additional requirements are for those to move forward. And I think Reed has looked very carefully at all of these GSPs and DWR's letters of evaluation and how they're accepting 2 and not accepting the other 2 at this time. So I don't know, Reed, if there are like maybe key highlights.
Yeah, a couple of points I would make that that we've discussed with the planning team and I believe to an extent with the advisory committee as well at different meetings. But a couple of highlights being for those that were not accepted, DWR was noting that there was information, data about basin conditions that was not reflected in the GSP, and pointing out that the GSA and through the GSP needs to account for all of the available data and best information about the basin and subbasin conditions. So that was one of their key comments. And the other was in an instance where, with regard to the 6 sustainability indicators, one of the GSPs that they did not accept was flagged as having not set criteria for one of the indicators. And the response from DWR indicated that they would prefer that a GSA set even interim criteria, recognizing that there's still uncertainty in these early years of implementing Sigma about how the basins operate and how they respond to different conditions. But in the perspective DWR seemed to have was that they wanted GSAs to not defer setting criteria, but move forward with interim criteria if they felt that was the necessary first step in their process.
And if I could just jump in there is one more question that was in the chat box, and Reed, I think this is probably a question for you. It is, can the public easily view the production and levels of the monitoring wells over history?
So yeah, if I understand the question correctly, I'd say check out the GSA website, Napa County Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And right there on the home page, in the lower half, there's a link for interactive maps. There you can find an interactive map, and it will show you the wells that are being monitored. And you can click on those and then bring up a live hydrograph that's interactive, and you can see the hydrograph, you can see the data that are collected by the county, and then a few other wells that are monitored by DWR currently in the subbasin as well.
I just posted that into the chat box.
We do have one more question in the question and answer room. Are we going to publish the questions from tonight, and so the public can see the breadth of the questions that have been asked? Jameson, I believe that will be included. Monday may be the first two meetings, but we will follow up, or we will be able to get these questions and responses in by Monday as well.
That's correct. The first two meetings will be done by Monday. This meeting will take us a little bit longer than that, but we will endeavor to be as quick as we possibly can. And with that, I don't see any more questions and answers or questions in the chat.
All right, well, then it's almost 7:45. The first two workshops also lasted about 2 hours, so we're being pretty consistent here. Again, thank you, everyone. And we're going to go ahead and close the workshop now. And again, please, if you have anything you want to follow up with Jameson or I, please do so. We'd be happy to help you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.